Yeah, so law enforcement actually leaked this footage. This footage is from Saturday, August 5th. And the reason that law enforcement leaked it is because they want the American people to understand the national security implications right now of Biden's open border policies. And so it's a exclusive to War Room, Steve. And we're breaking this story right now. And what you're seeing here, this is three gunmen that crossed over from Miguel Alemán, Mexico, and they crossed into Fronton, Texas, which is near Roma, Texas. Roma, Texas is a very small community right on the border. It has about 11,000 people for population. Fronton is even smaller. There's no gas station there. And Roma is the most violent area on the southwest border. And you can see in these images, these gunmen have long guns. They have holsters for pistols. They have body armor on them. And keep in mind, in Mexico, they have some of the most restricted gun laws. They're not allowed, Mexican citizens are not allowed to have guns. They're not allowed to hold pistols. They're not allowed to have body armor. So you know that these are identified as cartel members. Imagery is taken in Fronton, Texas. This is on the U.S. side. And what happened was Vortex was called, but they are coming from McAllen, Texas. So by the time they arrived on the scene, when these images were taken, these gunmen had escaped already into the United States. So now they're among the 1.5 million known gotaways that we have under the Biden administration. We have 25,000 just for the month of July known gotaways alone. And so now they're in Texas and they're armed and they're dangerous. And keep in mind, these are with the cartel New Generation, Jalisco New Generation. That's the most violent cartel in Mexico. And what's happening in this area, why you're seeing this, is in Miguel Alemán, you have a battle for control of territory among three different cartels. The Gulf Cartel has controlled that area for the last 20 years. In the last 2.5 years, the Northeast Cartel started for control over that area. And last May, now you have the most violent cartel, Cartel Jalisco New Generation, has also joined the fight for control of that area. That's an area where there's a lot of smuggling that goes through. The only wall in Fronton is a short wall, very small. It doesn't protect the area. So what is happening, you're seeing the national security implications right now that Biden's open policies are having on the American people. A lot of people in that area are leaving that area. We had an opportunity to talk to a very well-respected veteran, Doc Michael Vickers. He was briefing us yesterday on the state of affairs down here, and he was telling us the impact that Biden's immigration policies are having on the healthcare system, on the schools. He runs into immigrants almost on a daily basis on his own ranch. He was showing us photos of all the deceased immigrants that he and his wife run into themselves on their ranch. And so what's happening is the Biden administration is actually putting illegal immigrants' interests over the United States' interest.
A lot of good and heartfelt, good uplifting feeling can come from watching news that shows that there is a bipartisan effort and there are solutions. Because honestly, Kelly, when you do watch those divisive news reports about, the fighting between Republicans and Democrats, yeah, it's a little bit satisfactory, but at the end you feel very hopeless because you don't feel like there's any solutions. But actually, this is why we should be talking about the topic in this show that you're starting, hope, because you do feel fulfilled after you realize there is hope, there are solutions, and people actually are working on them, even if they don't get talked about.
You're so right. And when we talk about the members of Capitol Hill working, for example, on this bipartisan immigration bill, it's a measure still being considered and debated, of course. The fact that you mentioned bipartisanship, it means that both sides of the aisle recognize there indeed is a problem, and now they're making every effort to find a solution. Talk to me a little bit about that in terms of what the members have discussed in regards to this new bill.
So this is called the Dignity Act. It was actually introduced by a Republican, but she was able to pull on her Democrat colleague, and it funds border security. I think it's about $25 billion to fund border security. It addresses the cartel issue because we know that's been talked about a lot, and actually both sides do recognize that there is an issue with the cartels taking control of the border, but they oftentimes don't provide solutions or move forward with solutions because Republicans only want this aspect. Democrats only want the immigration laws to be changed. So oftentimes you don't see this bipartisan effort come to the surface. Hopefully that will come up more. And also another issue with immigration that this bill addresses that I really think is important is the asylum process, because right now there are there's a huge backlog. There are millions of people, Kelly, who have lived in this country for years, and they are unable to get their asylum claims processed because the system is overwhelmed. So this bill also addresses that, them, and they just work on them one bit at a time. That would really be effective, because oftentimes you see them come out with these massive bills that only tackle border security or only tackle pathway to citizenship. But actually, if you take that bill apart, I think, and just to tackle the small issues like the asylum system, then you'll probably have much more success. And that's what I would honestly like to see in Congress as they continue to work through this bill.
If you could repeat a little bit more of that, what you were saying, please.
For sure. So the Dignity Act that was introduced by a Republican, Congresswoman Salazar, she was able to get her Democrat colleague, Escobar from Texas, on this bill. And what it does is it addresses the concerns that both parties have. You have billions of dollars that are sent to secure the border, to address the cartel issue, which actually both parties do agree there is an issue with the cartels. Then you also have another key piece of this bill, which I think is very important, is it addresses the asylum system, because right now, Kelly, there are millions of people who are waiting for their asylum claims to be processed and adjudicated. They've been in this country for years, and they're just on a wait list because there is a problem with the asylum system that's in part caused by the immigration influx that we've seen over the past few years. So this addresses that. And what I'd like to see Congress members do more is to take these small issues and tackle them, because oftentimes when I speak with members and I ask them about asylum reform, they all agree this needs to happen. Or I ask them about addressing cartels and human trafficking. They say, yes, we need to address that. So I think instead of trying to lump everything in one big bill, they should really just tackle the parts where everybody agrees that can really help the people here in this country.
Yeah, taking those little steps of action ultimately leads to a bigger solution that will help more people. You know, you talked about the cartels. You talked about the millions of Americans still waiting. That leads to a couple of other discussions with this program or this bill that they're introducing. Will it, in terms of dealing with the cartels, also deal with fentanyl? As you know, fentanyl is a very disturbing issue that's causing so many lives to be lost here in America.
So I don't think this bill directly addresses fentanyl, but just by addressing the cartels in and of itself will actually help with the fentanyl issue. And on fentanyl, I mean, that's another really bipartisan issue where it actually doesn't even need to be a part of an immigration bill, Kelly, actually, because they passed through the House the HALT Fentanyl Act, which makes fentanyl a Schedule I drug, which is like one step towards trying to increase the consequences for having access to this drug. So, there are bipartisan efforts also on the fentanyl issue that are ongoing. Just last week, I went to a hearing where the DEA administrator was testifying before a subcommittee, and both parties were asking questions that were generally concerning. They were, engaged with the DEA, the administrator, and they wanted to know what the administration was doing to tackle fentanyl, but you can see a consensus there also on the fentanyl issue. So I think it can be handled in a totally separate bill.
A very important bill that needs to be taking place. Of course, former governor of not Alabama, but Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, who worked along those lines when he was serving in administration, wanted to talk about that on a recent program. He stated that scheduling it is not really the answer in his opinion. He wants to see more of a consensus bipartisanship to which you're talking about, to make people more aware of fentanyl and how it has to be stopped, not just from China, but also from the border. And having said that, what you've heard from members of Capitol Hill, do they side with that type of agreement that we've got to make people more aware? We've got to make the American people more armed in terms of what they themselves can do about this?
About the fentanyl issue or about the immigration issue?
About the fentanyl issue.
Yeah, they're very bipartisan on this. After that HALT Fentanyl Act passed Congress, I did interviews about it. I just asked, why isn't there a stronger measure considering how serious the issue is? But a lot of them, said, yes, we need to address it in a more strong way. I guess they're just, there needs to be more of a push. Maybe fentanyl isn't an area where they get lobbyists. Maybe fentanyl isn't an issue where lobbyists are constantly knocking on their door wanting to talk about it. So maybe it just goes under the radar a little bit. Maybe there needs to be more constituents involved. that have been directly affected by the fentanyl crisis to come to Capitol Hill, and that kind of speaks to how Americans need to be more engaged with the government and, you know, really make their voices heard. Maybe that's what's needed. Maybe just a little nudge, because these guys, they are busy, and there are a lot of lobbyists on Capitol Hill.
Creation are no longer as good as they were in the very beginning, are no longer pure, and all of them have accrued karma and sins. And this accounts for destruction coming about. This kind of sin is what has been referred to in religious contexts as original sin. So that the universe could be saved, the Creator directed a multitude of higher beings and divine sovereigns to descend to the earth and assume human form in this setting, where they would suffer, elevate, atone for their sins, and forge themselves anew, reascending to heaven as a result. The Creator has been remaking the universe at the same time as saving humankind. The new universe is perfectly pure and simply glorious. If, in a trying setting like this, a person can still keep his thoughts virtuous, if he can hold his or her ground against the onslaught of modern values and views, and stick to traditional ones, and if he still believes in the divine in the face of assaults from the atheist and evolutionary camps, then that person will fulfill his purpose, to gain salvation and return to heaven. All of the madness now unfolding in the world was planned as such for the final phase by divine beings. Their goal was to test the lives here and see whether they were worthy of salvation, and give them a chance to, in the process, work off their sins and karma while going through difficult things. And all of this was done so that people could be saved and gain deliverance back to heaven. All of this is to say that the purpose of people's lives on this earth isn't to accomplish something in the world. All of the intense efforts and attempts people make in life, and their drive to get what they want, which can even involve resorting to unscrupulous means, only make people immoral in the end. The reason people came to this world and became human was to atone for their sins and karma, and to make significant spiritual progress. People came to this world to gain salvation. They came and assumed human form to await the Creator and His salvation back to their heavenly kingdom. And while they waited, they built up merit over their many past lives. And that was the purpose of people's rebirths. The troubled nature of this world is meant to make something great. Americans to, quote, raise awareness and make sure we are guarding against this. Gallagher denounced the 2 U.S. Navy sailors who were arrested for allegedly spying for the CCP, calling them traitors. The congressman also noted that the CCP's ambitions for Taiwan will lead the regime to stealing sensitive information from the U.S. Did Chinese officials influence U.S. energy policies? According to an exclusive report from Fox News last week, the head of President Biden's energy department spoke multiple times with the Chinese regime's top energy official. That was days before the Biden administration released a historic amount of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The administration released 50 million barrels of oil from the reserve in 2021 to counter high gas prices. It was sold to the highest bidder, which included some Chinese state-run energy companies. Fox News says it obtained internal calendars showing U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm speaking privately with the CCP energy official just days before that. The Energy Department now says the meeting was about climate change, but isn't saying specifically what was discussed. Republican leaders have criticized the oil releases, saying it weakened national security and helped foreign adversaries. Republican lawmakers want answers from the Biden administration on alleged Chinese malware attacks. The attacks reportedly targeted key government officials and utility companies, including those serving U.S. military installations. A group of lawmakers sent a letter last week to defend Secretary Lloyd Austin and NSA Cybersecurity Director Rob Joyce. They want to know the extent of the alleged hacks, how long the Biden administration has been aware of them, and what steps are being taken to address the situation. The lawmakers said the CCP is increasing its attacks on U.S. bases and military infrastructure, and that's matched by their increasingly aggressive behavior in the Taiwan Strait and other international waters. The lawmakers added that CCP aggression in the cyber domain must be met with a firm, resolute, and measured response from the United States. Chinese ownership of U.S. farmland has been increasing over the past decade, which some in Congress consider a major national security issue. A related issue involves allegations of agricultural espionage. The House Select Committee on China held a roundtable event in Iowa to hear about this firsthand. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
There were many aspects as to what was discussed at that Iowa field hearing, but one major concern that was highlighted was the CCP's ongoing efforts to steal highly prized agricultural technology. They gave one example that happened in Iowa about 10 years ago. There was a Chinese man spotted digging up and stealing seeds straight from an Iowa farmer's land.
Not just any seeds, these were hybrid seeds. So these high-tech seeds are among the most tightly guarded trade secrets in the industry.
Crops that are grown from these seeds can then be sold by China at much cheaper prices. Trade is also a major issue.
Especially when agricultural exports, especially from your district and others, are so vital to our economy.
And a separate issue that has garnered much more attention, especially from folks here in Congress recently, is the issue of the Chinese buying farmland here, especially near military bases,
where they could potentially monitor our activities.
This has led to half of the states having passed or considered restricting Chinese purchases of U.S. farmland, and lawmakers are looking to do so on a federal level. Now there's a mysterious land purchase that is right around a California air base, which is known as the gateway to the Pacific. One concerned congressman saying, "We have no idea where the nearly $900 million has come from." They bought well over 55,000 acres of land in the area, and the purchase raises a major concern. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Ever sails so close to American shores. How should Washington respond? And what's the best way to counter China? Experts say it's to apply pressure where it hurts most. But where are they the most vulnerable? We sat down with Grant Newsham, retired Marine Colonel and author of When China Attacks, for details. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Had their largest ever joint naval exercise close to Alaska over the weekend. This was armed, but it did not enter U.S. territorial waters. So how should we be reading this?
This is a direct challenge to the United States. You'll notice that it's taking place while there's all sorts of talk about an attack on Taiwan. Certainly, there's already just immense military pressure on Taiwan, even if not a shooting war just yet. And I think so much of what America has wanted, the U.S. government has wanted, is the Chinese and the Russians just to say, hey, we get it, let's cool things off. But they have, in fact, sort of turned up the heat. And it shows also that Russia and the Chinese have a clear interest in the Arctic region and that they intend to dominate it. While we've ignored it or left it up to the Canadians, the Russians in particular have put together the military and the economic might to take that area or at least dominate it. And China as well has a real interest in it. And keep in mind that China is calling itself something that is called a near Arctic nation. There's no such concept in international law, but it started calling itself that about 2015. Nobody told them no, so they've kept at it. And the idea is that China, too, has legitimate interests in the Arctic and that it will defend them as necessary. Now, if you get out a map that's oriented, sort of looking down from the North Pole or from Alaska, you can see how it controls trade routes to Europe, into the Pacific as well. And the distances from Alaska to just about anywhere that matters are not that far, which is very useful in aviation or Air Force operations, or when you're shooting missiles. So this is an area whose time has come for finally getting the attention it deserves. The U.S. has needed to pay more attention to Alaska for a long time, and maybe they will.
you actually have an article out recently on how the two sides can actually come to the table. And you mentioned it has to be personal, especially for the Chinese Communist Party leadership. So how would we make that personal?
What I wrote in this article is what I'm getting at is that so much of what we do in our China policy is sort of not really focused where it ought to be, and it doesn't really give Chinese leadership much of a reason to talk or to do anything different. And so what I'm suggesting is, as I put it simply, make it personal. And here's how I would explain that. When you look at what we're doing to take on China now, say we're trying to build our military, get that in order, apply economic sanctions, very limited ones, but maybe stronger ones. We're trying to do something about the fentanyl scourge that China's pouring in and telling us they have no idea where it comes from. We're trying to do something about China's cyber espionage and the possibility of a sort of a cyber Pearl Harbor on us. But you look at all those things we're doing, and it doesn't really apply that much pressure on the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. And what they can argue is, look, it's just these Americans telling lies about us. They're trying to bully us. They're trying to contain us, keep China from its rightful place. And so the pressure kind of slides off onto the Chinese citizenry. And they actually kind of buy that. Yeah, we're being mistreated by these foreigners. And the Chinese Communist Party can get away with it. So what I suggest in the piece is that you, as I said, make it personal. And that is where you go after the CCP, the top leadership's main vulnerability, personal vulnerability that they can't blame on anyone else. And that is their amazing and unexplained personal wealth. And that is from Xi Jinping down. These guys have immense wealth, cash, real estate, relatives with green cards and residence permits overseas. China's leadership's overseas wealth is a form of corruption. Corruption is what brought down the KMT, the old nationalist government in China. And the Chinese communists know this, but they can't bring it to themselves to do what they need to do to stop it for obvious reasons. It's human nature. But this is where we would have a very profitable line of attack if we do this. And that might get the Chinese communists to sort of come to the table and actually talk about working out something that is in our benefit, not just to China's benefit.
And Grant, on that note, it does sound like, say, going after the Chinese elites or leadership's investments and massive wealth is a trigger point. But what would the issues that we would then discuss be? Because it seems in the past when, say, Antony Blinken went to China, human rights, fentanyl did not end up in discussion. So how would this help us going forward?
Well, you've got to have some very, very specific things you need the Chinese to do. And you can actually have a scorecard for those, really, if you look at whether or not China lays off Taiwan. Do they stop the military threatening? Do they stop the verbal threatenings and slaughter towards Taiwan? Do they keep trying to strangle Taiwan diplomatically? What do they do to the Philippines? Do they sort of stop bullying and muscling in on on Philippine maritime terrain? What do they do to Japan? Do they lay off the Senkaku Islands? Well, those would be some things that you could watch for very quickly. You could get the Chinese to do. Do they stop sending drugs into the United States? That's another thing that you could look for. How about starting to obey the promises they made when they joined the World Trade Organization? Those are quantifiable things that you can see whether they are or aren't doing. So there's a number of things that you can keep an eye on to see if Chinese behavior changes.
President Biden's student loan policies. Today, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals temporarily blocks new provisions that would make it easier for borrowers to get their debts erased when they're misled or defrauded by their college. And another lawsuit filed last week challenges $39 billion of student debt forgiveness. The president's major student loan forgiveness program blocked by the Supreme Court in late June. The administration faces additional lawsuits over other policy changes aimed at making it easier for borrowers to pay back their loans. The federal government approving a pill to help women battle postpartum depression, and the Houston Astros visit the White House. NewsNet's David Aid brings us today's Washington Report.